Good morning. I wanted to do an example of Dark Age of Man combat. So, as the session starts, I roll a random seed. That seed says Queen Lannister's army moves. Uh, okay, I decide to make that army moving on Von Mort's fief, what's left of it, the remnants of it. And part of my spelling, I'm using Notepad. There's no spell checker, and I'm not a great speller. And we know this because let's say it's a session 2 of the 3 gents who have murdered Von Mort in the night, and they must escape now as we ended the session after they murdered Von Mort. So the presenter sets up this current event at Von Mort's Man's Keep. The presenter sets the difficulty for this army at 18. The 3 PCs find themselves trying to escape the manse in early hours after having murdered the nobleman Von Mort. They are running through the manse, fighting past Von Mort's soldiers. They're narrating this. And now suddenly they face the Norseman raiders out in the yard, DV of 15. Only about 15 raiders remain and from an earlier session attack at Dredgewater. Part of the reason they've murdered Von Mort is he was in league with these raiders, and he is housing the remnants of what's left of that assault force in his property. This mob of soldiers and raiders will constitute 17 wounds and a DV of 15. The presenter will set the narrative space with a description of what, where, when, and how. Urgency, right now, detailed and intimate, crowded melee combat. Okay, so they narrate as they fight through the manse, and I make them make a couple of rolls as they fight through the soldiers in the middle of the night. There's those that might be aware of them because they're not going to sneak out. Let's say they're running for the doors and the exits. They want to get out now that Gel's character has pitched the head of Von Mort into the courtyard in front of these barely awake Vikings, right? These Vikings, which, again, they did this in the middle of the night. But now the Vikings are running for the front door as they're running for the exit. And let's say they scramble out the wood steps out into the yard, and they're surrounded by 15 of these Vikings plus 2 soldiers from the manse. And I set the tone that this is, as you are surrounded, I set the tone that you are within, you are crowded, you are surrounded, and you are in very tight location melee combat. So I have set the detail as it's right now, as opposed to a larger scale, grandiose narrative of what occurs. I set that they are in melee in tight spaces, and they are fallen upon, and then I might ask them all to make a roll as these Vikings thrust and drive with shields and weapons collapsing upon them in this crazy chaos. And any of them who roll successfully above that 15 will wound, technically killing, right? What we'll do is every one of them every wound will, or every critical wound will kill 1 or 2 of these Vikings as they are mobs. So they're just worth 1 point. And let's say 2 of the characters roll 16 and 18 of their combat score. And that's 2 down. The third fails and suffers a wound, right? As now they narrate what they're doing and they roll the dice. So let's say Del says, as I feel that thrust of that shield in the back on the top of my skull, as he drops it on the top of my head, I'm dizzy, but I drive forward with my weapon, and he rolls the dice, and he does a wound, kills that Viking. And then Robert rolls, and Ivan rolls, and they either take wounds or deliver wounds as they narrate this very intimate, turn-by-turn, urgent melee combat. Right? And then I can shrink that DV based on numbers, or I can expand that DV based on narrative stuff. So, for instance, Dale can narrate. He's running for the ramparts. He's going to run up the ramp or climb the ladder up onto the walls and try to get out of the middle of this fray. He doesn't want to be surrounded. So I might ramp it up and say, okay, you're describing multiple actions. You're gonna have to make an 18 to do that, right? But because he is not narrated, he's going to cause effect upon the mob. But if he succeeds, he'll successfully do that. And then I'll lower the numbers that he may face, which means I'll lower the DV because he's succeeded in creating a tactical situation in which they can't surround him. He's on the walls. They can only be on either side of him. They now can't surround him. But if he fails that roll, he's going to take damage and he won't succeed at getting to the wall, right? Robert narrates that he yells aloud and swings in broad strokes, trying to force Vikings to back away from him, give him space, and then he's going to, command in his nobleman's language that they need to stand down. Von Mort is dead. They are not enemies, and we make a roll to see how that mind/spirit, prestige check might affect the difficulty of the Vikings. Let's say he nails it. And again, I leave the DV at 15, right, for this situation. He succeeds, and I lower the DV now from the rest of the remainder of the fight to, let's say, 12 average. And I describe how some of the Vikings step away and lower their weapons, and they back out of the combat. And the soldiers of Von Mort continue to assault on Ivan's character. And then Ivan narrates that he is indeed killing, because that's what he does. He's already killed 3 guards to steal these uniforms, and he is indeed determined to kill these enemies of England. And he rolls the dice, and let's say rolls 16 plus his combat, and he kills another Viking or another soldier, whatever he describes. And we go from that urgent right here, right now perspective versus narrating. And again, Queen Leicester's army has not yet arrived. I have not, as a presenter, introduced it. They're in the middle of a courtyard fight, right? But I rolled this random seed. Queen Lancaster's army is moving on the remnants of Ron Fort. Now, remnants, I know what that means. But, of course, all that was on the chart was Queen Lancaster's army moves, right? I decide to make them moving on Von Mort, right? They don't know Von Mort's dead. It's in the middle of the night. Well, guess what? Banging into the walls of the fort, and we can hear the horns and the yelling. All of a sudden now, outside this fort, all of our heroes and what's left of these Vikings are trapped in the manse behind the wooden walls, and we have an army from Queen Leicester that's going to try to take over this fort. They're going to lay siege to this fort. So now we have a fight in the courtyard between the PCs, and now I've increased the difficulty as Queen Lancaster's army arrives and begins to try to breach the fort. Every turn, I will ask one of the players to roll as they try to batter the door of the fortress in, right? And I've made that difficulty for that army an 18, right? So if they roll above an 18, they don't breach that. They're not breaching the door. But if they roll below an 18, right, they're slowly breaching that door. So we just narrate in a grand scope, or we can narrow the narration to very urgent, very right here, right now. It'll depend utterly on how either the players introduce the narrative space, and we're talking about movement and time. So the players could narrate grand scope of movement and time, like a montage in a film, or the presenter can set up the scenario in that way, or vice versa. The player can narrate down to seconds and feet, or the GM can set the tone of seconds and feet. So this is why we talk about the narrative flavor. So it can be a single dice roll to determine certain things. It can be multiple dice rolls. But this is one of the examples of also how easily we can shift now into, so let's say the first thing I have to say is Dell's character has made it, let's say his character made it to the wall, and so he can see over the wall, and he sees now this army. Nobody else below can see it, but he makes a roll, right? He fills that roll. The roll is the doors hit, thunders, horns go, and now everybody in the courtyard is aware that somebody's outside the fort, right? They all scramble to the walls, including Ivan and Robert, and Vikings and everybody are up onto the walls looking over, and they see this army of Queen Leicesters, and they see their leaders with torches, etc., and they've got a ram, and they're ramming the front gate. Now we go into a montage narrative of this siege, of an immediate siege of Von Mort's manse, right? Now we change the scale in time as I narrate what they're doing, and then I say, okay, you know, I hand it over to Dell, and Dell narrates this kind of montage of time as his character runs the walls and shooting his bow, and they're throwing lit torches down below, and we make a roll to see how it's affecting this narrative. Robert's character, is commanding the Vikings to take defensive action, etc., etc. And Ivan's character is slinking around to the backside of the manse, looking for an escape tunnel or escape route out of the manse and to ride back to Dredgewater. And his Baron, right, as Ivan's character narrates, slinking through the dark, stripping off this uniform of Von Mort's that he's stolen, right, and he's riding on horseback for Von Mort. For whatever reasons of his own, but he might even narrate his goal is to get to get back to his Baron and tell him that the Queen's army is laying siege to Von Mort's manse. right? So, you know, and that now we can do meanwhiles, right? We can actually split the party. Ivan can narrate this ride and his middle of the night banging up the, you know, banging awake the Baron and having this dialogue. Meanwhile, we're back and forth narrating the siege in real time, right? Or in hours, right? And so the freedom to go in and out, ebb and flow through these things should become natural and easy for a shared cultural play. Should be prompted mostly by the presenter's control of the situation. If the presenter sees a certain thing, he's going to want to narrow the focus. If the players begin a process of narrating even on a grand scale in such a way that utterly fits what we're doing, then we're free to go. Meanwhile, the minute I introduce Queen Leicester's army, I'm rolling my random seed chart for the other random seed. Let's say I do. And let's say the next random seed that I generate is Plague. It just says Plague. Right? Okay. Now I decide, well, I can introduce the Plague later in the scenario. I can introduce the Plague via the Vikings that they're fighting, or I can introduce the Plague having come from Ireland's queen, the Queen of Ireland's army. They might be sick with the Plague as they are coming, as they are here, right? So I can introduce this very quietly, immediately, or I can save it for later in the session when they're traveling and doing something else, right? Or they hear rumor from the queens, if they capture any of the queens, when they hear rumor of why they're leaving Ireland, there's a plague in Ireland, right? So now we just know there's a plague that exists in Ireland. Meanwhile, are these guys plague-ridden, right? So we just ebb and flow. We just ebb and flow through the entire thing. It's a process of shared space. And there is no hard and fast procedures. The only hard and fast procedures are who sets the pace and the tone. That's either going to be the GM that's bringing in new information or setting the tone for current situation. And, of course, the DVs that they mean. And again, even this we can keep quiet. He can just say roll the die. He does not have to tell the players what they need. However, I like the players knowing so they're confident in their narrative space. If I don't tell them what they need when they roll the dice, it's always going to be at 16. And then I go, yeah, go ahead and narrate what that means. If I tell them what they need and they roll the dice, they know how to just keep narrating through the space. So this is the goal of Dark Age of Man, to reduce procedures, reduce the I go, you go philosophy, where it's more of a shared space. Players can intercede. Players can speak up and intercede at any time, and I have no clue what I'm spelling this stuff right. Intercede at any time, throwing in what they're doing and how they're doing it, etc., etc. They're going to want to stay within the space, meaning time and feet. For instance, if we're narrating a 2-week journey, they need to think about their narration, what they're doing in the montage of this 2-week journey. You don't want to turn it into I'm making a fire, right? Wait a second, making a fire is like right here, right now. You've just literally slowed time. Not to say they can't, right? Especially the GM could. So the GM now wants to introduce a random seed of highwaymen to our party as they journey on a 2-week montage, and the presenter might slow and narrow that space down to on the 15th day. As you are preparing camp, you've hunted, etc. You are all eating around a campfire. You hear the crackling of the trees around you, and you hear the grunts, and you hear somebody in a language you don't understand cry out, "Surrender your weapons and all of your valuables," from the darkness. So I've now slowed the montage down to a right here, right now, right? So it should be a very comfortable thing, and it should be easy to do. And that's one of the reasons we make everything a simple DV. Again, wounds can be based on the creature or creatures, right, if they're plural, or mob, mob wounds, which should just be multiple of such things. So, like wolves. Wolves might have 2 wounds. Let's say there's 6 wolves. That could be 12 in a mob, 12 wounds to kill all the wolves, right? But you can play a little loose with this depending on the situation, right? I mean, again, what we don't want to fudge dice. So we do not fudge dice, but the presenter is free to sculpt the DV and the details, right? So what that means is just because the book says wolves are a DV of 12 with wounds of 2 doesn't mean that 6 wolves, right, would be automatically be 12 wounds, right? You could say these wolves are malnourished. And I can justify by making them, 6 sick wolves with a DV of 10 and 6 wounds, right? But I can narrate one wolf at a time attacking, or we can narrate a mob type combat, right? Again, we determine the details of the fight based on the players' want, the GM's want and desire, and what just makes sense, right? Are we narrating Helm's Deep on a grand scale? Or are we drilling down to the details of a sword fight on the walls of Helm's Deep? Right, and we can go in and out of that just like a film, just like a book, right? We can narrate the armies rolling onto Helm's Deep and how they crash against the walls, and how the characters move along the walls trying to lower difficulty by commanding troops and making rolls. They're not necessarily wounding this giant army, but they're lowering its difficulty for the next rolls and the next rolls. Then we zero in on the actual melee combat between Aragorn and 4 orcs at the hole in the wall and blah 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 blah. And we just go in and out, ebb and flow, and we end up with these grand epic moments that don't. Here's the thing: we can have detailed minutia, a detailed focus, or epic, big. Rules do not change nor grow more complicated. Game is the same regardless, right? That's what allows us to split party. That would allow Ivan to go on his own epic quest by just ebbing and flowing the conversation as to what he's doing. He's going. He might need to make a die roll. He might have to have a role play between him and the king of blah blah blah. Meanwhile, we screen wipe, or we go to chapter 16. Chapter 16, we're back at Von Mort, and Robert is sitting now with the Queen's leader, as they've called a truce, because Queen Lysa was there to kill Von Mort. Turns out Robert and company done it for her. So now they're actually parlaying, and they're having a conversation. Oh, well, if you've killed that SOB, we're good to go, right? What are you doing with these Vikings? Well, they're the remnants of Von Mort's scheme, blah, 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 right? We just ebb and flow, and we get so much done. We have epic stories that come from play, not from script, not from module, not from written information, right? From players, GM sharing these pieces that then grow organically, right? Remember, we call them random seeds for a reason, because from seeds grow organic play, narrative, narrative, character depth, world, broadening, I cannot spell, forgive me, broadening world, right? So random seeds grows organic play, narrative, character depth, world broadening, and arcs from results. That's it. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.